It is my great pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Rhonda Williams to you. She's joined us from Case Western University, Kentucky Reserve University, where she's taught for several years, and has also founded and directed both the Social Justice Institute and also postdoctoral fellowship in African American Studies. She's written 2 books. Her most recent, Concrete Demands, The Search for Black Power in the 20th Century, came out just this year. And she has also written the award-winning Politics of Public Housing, Black Women's Struggles Against Urban Inequality, released in 2004. In 2009, she was awarded Case Western's inaugural Inclusion and Diversity Achievement Award. She's worked tirelessly to broker understanding of issues regarding marginalization, inequalities, and activism in both her work as a teacher and also as a scholar. She's delivered community presentations to the Congressional and Congress Fellows of History of Institutional Racism and given numerous lectures, including one to the Smithsonian Institution and the Woodrow Wilson Center in D.C. To be able to bring an educator and scholar activist of Dr. Williams' caliber to this campus makes me very proud of what we're able to do here at Lycoming. And I hope that you will join me in giving her a very warm welcome for sharing some of her research and her thoughts about Black power and Black politics in the 20th century with us tonight. Thank
you. In 1969, during a speech in West London, author and novelist James Baldwin talks about freedom and the U.S. stance of waging war in its name. Baldwin says in his slow and deliberate clip, for sure, a war is being waged. Yes, indeed. And he said, but let me speak plainly. Let's speak plainly about this, he said. We know, everybody knows, no matter what the professions in my happy country may be, that we are not bombing people out of existence in the name of freedom. If it were freedom we are concerned about, then long, long ago we would have done something about Johannesburg, South Africa. If it were freedom we were concerned about, boys and girls, as I stand here, would not be perishing in the streets of Harlem. We, meaning the U.S. state, are concerned with power. Nothing more than that. And most unlikely for the Western world, it has consolidated its power on the backs of people who are now willing to die rather than to be used any longer. And then in the question and answer period, Baldwin was asked a question about integration and Black power.
We'll call him Dick. The point I want to get across is, which is better, integration or Black power?
Is that a question?
But don't hit me hard, just explain it.
No. I don't, in the first place, I don't see that there is necessarily any division between them. Let me take Black power first.
Yeah.
And integration later. Black power is a very simple phrase, and I don't know why everyone gets upset about Black power. One's watching the effect of white power all over the world, you know, and no one even questions it. No one even questions the white power which is now destroying thousands of men, women, and children in Vietnam. That power, because it is power, is sacred.
Yeah.
No one questions the power of the Bank of the Holy Ghost. The term Black power, you know, strikes terror into many people's minds because it implies precisely the overthrow of the Bank of the Holy Ghost. At least they think so. And it does actually mean that. What it means is that Black people, this is all it means, that Black people have in their own hands the control of their own destinies. That is all it means. The English have a great phrase for it. They're very proud of the phrase. It's called the self-determination of peoples.
So you heard Baldwin asking, answering a question about integration and Black power in the video clip. He talks about Black power. What are some people so upset about Black power? How people are upset when we are engaging with and operating within the context, I'm off script,
of white power? Or, you know, how can we think about this, right? So just a year before that talk in West London, in 1968, in the year of global upheaval and the amplification of black liberation struggles, James Baldwin had written this. He said, "I have never known a Negro all my life who was not obsessed with black power." That same year, in 1968, Amy Jack Garvey, the second wife of black nationalist Marcus Garvey, who was jailed and deported from the United States in 1927, and the vociferous steward of Garveyism, published Black Power in America through United Printers Limited, located on Marcus Garvey Drive in Kingston, Jamaica. Now, interlude, here's an interlude. Marcus Garvey is the co-founder of the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, with Amy Ashwood Garvey, his first wife. He was a black nationalist who believed in race pride and self-determination. He ran the largest, or put together the largest black mass organization, which was the UNIA, which had global reach as far away as Australia. Marcus Garvey believed in black nationhood. He believed in Africa for Africans. The red, black, green flag is from this moment. He influenced Audley Queen Mother Moore and Hubert Harrison, who eventually parted ways with Marcus Garvey because Marcus Garvey believed in black capitalism, and Harrison, known as Black Socrates, believed in black socialism. And Queen Mother Moore herself, for a short time, worked with the Communist Party in Harlem. And I'm taking you on a route here. So see if you can remember the names, or at least follow the names, right? So we started with Marcus Garvey, from Ashwood, from Amy Jack Garvey, then Marcus Garvey, then Amy Ashwood Garvey, Black Nationalist, Race Pride, Self-Determination, Black Mass Organization, UNIA, in Australia, Africa for Africans, the red, black, green flag. Marcus Garvey believed in black nationhood. He influenced Audley Queen Mother Moore, and Hubert Harrison he worked with, who eventually parted ways with him, right? Because he believed in black socialism, and Marcus Garvey believed in black capitalism. Now, Queen Mother Moore herself, for a short time, worked with the Communist Party in Harlem. That's where we stopped before I went back. Marcus Garvey now influenced Louise and Earl Little. Anybody know who Louise and Earl Little is? Malcolm X's parents. He influenced Louise and Earl Little, who begat Malcolm Little, who became Malcolm X, who would, one, be influenced by his Garveyite parents, and two, among others, Elijah Muhammad, who founded the Nation of Islam, and who, as Elijah Poole, was influenced by Garveyism's black nationalism. And Malcolm X would also be influenced by Queen Mother Moore, who founded the Reparations Committee after World War II and mentored black radical internationalists such as Max Stanford, who, with Don Freeman from Cleveland and Western Reserve College, Case Western Reserve University, founded the Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, in the early 1960s. And both Max and Don will meet Gloria Richardson of the Cambridge Movement, and Malcolm X at the 1963 Grassroots Conference in Detroit, where Malcolm delivers the famous message to the grassroots. And both Max, now Muhammad Ahmed, and Don, who in 2014 founded the Committee for Social Justice with his soulmate, Ms. Norma Freeman, to protest the Cleveland atrocity in which police, after a high-speed chase, killed 2 people in a hail of 137 bullets in 2012, both Max and Don were influenced by Robert F. Williams, leader of the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina, who was dismissed as a leader because of his belief in black self-defense against white vigilantes, citizenry, and police violence, and who, by the time of the Detroit Conference in 1963, was in exile in Cuba. And Don Freeman and Max Stanford, like others, would travel to the South the same year as Freedom Summer in 1964, and they wanted to meet with SNCC activists and test their ideas about building a black revolutionary nationalist effort. And in 1965, Malcolm X would be assassinated, and Stokely Carmichael of SNCC would be helping people in Lowndes County to organize the Black Panther electoral party. And. After a number of twists and turns and shifts and influences and events and roots, ROUTES, and proliferation of organizations, by 1966, SNCC, with Carmichael as its chair, and Ruby Doris Smith Robinson as its executive director, and James Foreman, its former executive director, leading efforts around Black liberation and international affairs, SNCC and CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and many other persons and organizations had turned to or formed under the big tent of Black power. And that's just one way to connect some of the dots, starting with Amy Jacques Garvey. So now let's get back to Amy Jacques Garvey, because that was an interlude. Okay? So now let's get back to Amy Jacques Garvey, shall we? Who preceded this brief interlude, tracing the roots, the ROOTS, right? And the roots, the ROUTES, and hear about her pamphlet published about Black Power in 1968. The featured essay was titled The Source and Course of Black Power in America. And it began this way. It said, quote, "What depths of emotion a small word can evoke. What depths of emotion a small word can evoke. Hate and love seem to take the highest rating of all, while words by themselves seem harmless, but combined with another, they have explosive reaction. For instance, she explained the use of the word for, F-O-R, in the 40-year-old slogan, Africa for Africans. Remember, if we go back to the interlude echo, right? Where it said Africa for Africans, red, black, green flag, Marcus Garvey, right? She explained the use of the word for in the 40-year-old slogan, Africa for Africans, and talked about how it had profound implications. She said it challenged, in her words, European imperialists in Africa, and served as, quote, a hope and goal to Africa's sons and daughters all over the world. And she goes on to say, she says, similarly, Black power now confronts the United States of America. And she continued, this slogan in the minds of whites seems to conjure up Black magic as it strikes fear in their hearts and even causes the government to become concerned as to what actions these two magic words may cause Black citizens to commit. 35 years later, ruminating on his own role in raising consciousness about Black power, Kwame Ture, a.k.a. Stokely Carmichael, 1966, Greenwood, Mississippi, recalled the moment when he uttered, quote, just two ordinary words, Black and power, at the June 66 rally, again in Greenwood, Mississippi. Those words traversed the nation and eventually the world with lightning media speed. Lightning media speed. We think it's lightning now. It was lightning then with these two words, Black and power, connected with an ampersand, invisible, Black power. Lightning media speed. He said, who could have thought it? Yes, that's my voice. Stoley, who could have thought it? You know, he observed. He said, I mean, two simple, clear, very commonly used English words. Two simple, clear, very commonly used English words. One an adjective, the other a noun, basic, he says. Nothing the least obscure or academically pretentious about them. Nothing mysterious or even slightly ambiguous either. Yet, as James Baldwin, Amy Jacques Garvey, Stokely Carmichael, and others quickly discovered, the words Black and power, while separately harmless and inoffensive, have become, quote, apparently incomprehensible in combination, and, quote, entirely beyond the cognitive reach of the white national media and public. The first black U.S. Congresswoman, Shirley Chisholm, also offered her view shortly before mounting her 1972 campaign for the presidency. Chisholm reflected on the phrase in her speech at Howard University. She says, everybody, she explained, is so hysterical and panic-stricken because of the adjective that precedes the word power, black. She then offered her take. Black power simply reflected black people's desires to control their destinies. So that meant, quote, people just have to get used to that word, black power. So what is this complicated term, black power? Simple but complicated term, black power. Rooted in the broad search for empowerment for black people, black power, small b and p, is arguably a general and timeless goal. However, black power, capital B and P, represents a historically contextualized set of oppositional ideologies in politics. Okay? A historically contextualized set of oppositional ideologies in politics. Undergirded by race consciousness and pride, nationhood, self-determination, and sovereignty, black power is a politics in which black people place less faith in white goodwill and paid more attention to the structures of power. In doing so, they demanded the authority to control decisions as well as resources impacting black people's lives and communities. While this has often meant mounting efforts to challenge, if not alter, regimes of power, it has not always resulted in, or even for some necessitated, transforming oppressive regimes. And I'm going to say that again because it's extremely important, because it will begin to help you understand the big tent of black power, right? And the idea that black power is not one thing. So while this has often meant mounting efforts to challenge, if not alter, regimes of power, it has not always resulted in, or even for some black power activists, necessitated transforming oppressive regimes. A la Hubert Harrison deciding at some point to break with Marcus Garvey because he disagreed with him on his black capitalist politics as a black socialist, but both of them are progenitors of black empowerment and black power politics. For generations, there have always been black people who have hoped for liberty and struggled for rights and inclusion in a country that espouses it. However, the daily battles and indignities, very important, even, because some people say it's like Civil Rights Movement, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, 64, Voting Rights Act, 65, Voting Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Fair Housing Act, 68, all these acts, right? However, the daily battles and indignities intrinsic to living in a white-controlled nation, despite, happily so, achieving the Civil Rights Act of 64 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, but despite achieving the Civil Rights Act of 64 and 65, the daily indignity intrinsic to living in a white-controlled nation, fertilized by notions of black inferiority and economic inequality, also served as a constant reminder, as constant reminders of a different, murkier reality. In eras rife with nation building, wars, and rights and liberation struggles, this murkier reality produced caution, angst, disgust, and desire, all of which gave rise to the concrete demands and impassioned liberation struggles in a nation built on and at times aggressively intent upon maintaining racial and economic hierarchy. It fueled nationalist and radical struggles during the first half of the 20th century, as well as explicit articulations. Notice I said the first half of the 20th century, even coming off of 64 and 65. It fueled nationalist and radical struggles during the first half of the 20th century, as well as explicit articulations, the daily indignities and battles and struggles of quote-unquote Negro and Black power between World War II and 1966. What you're getting are the roots and a sample of the expressions, right? Beyond this 1966 moment, right? Interlude, took you this way, right? Back and forth. Y'all good? Y'all good? Y'all good? I can't hear you. You good? Okay. All right. Okay. You're getting, the backs and forth, the connections, the thread, the tissue, right? That helps us to understand this thing beyond 66. Because folks kind of just think 66, Black power. And it just, explodes, right? But it has the roots and the roots. It has crucibles and progenitors and genealogy, right? So these daily indignities and battles actually help to fuel these different kinds of nationalist and radical struggles during the first half of the 20th century, would set the stage to provide the seeds that plant the seeds, that germinate the seeds, that water the seeds, that grow the seeds, that become the explicit articulations of quote-unquote Negro and then eventually Black power between World War II and 1966. This signaled both the emergence and suppression of a robust, unapologetic Black politics that took center stage in the 1960s and 1970s, that part of the story that we're most familiar with, right, in the era of what I call expansive Black power politics. By 1980, that zeitgeist of Black power had publicly waned in that current iteration, right, in the face of new political and economic forces. That part of the story I'm not going to tell as much, but we can talk about what that looks like. So for the rest of the presentation, what I want to do is this. I will begin to rethink and discuss Black power politics in snapshots, right? And through disruptions, with the goal of exposing, hopefully along the way and adding to what I've already talked about, the complicated nature of the vigorous search for Black self-determination and equality in the 20th century, both before and after the familiar narrative and public popularization and simultaneous white mainstream demonization of the rallying cry of Black power in 1966. The familiar Meredith March is continued by those who are in the civil rights struggle. James Meredith is making a march. He is shot from the side of the road with buckshot, and it ends up in the hospital, trying to protest for actually the ability to exercise voting rights and to have a say in the community as a Black person. And he's fell by some buckshot on the side of the road. And so those in the movement, from the SCLC and from SNCC and other organizations decide they're going to continue the march. And it's at this time in 66, where they're setting up a campsite to prepare for the marchers coming, right? Because they're on this trek to finish this march, that Carmichael is arrested because the police said organizers did not have a permit to actually set up a campsite on the grounds of a quote-unquote Negro or Black church that allowed them and gave them authorization to set up a campsite. But apparently in that moment, clearly there was no self-determination for how the Black leaders of that school could decide how their school and those grounds could be used, right? So the police said, time out. right? And they took Carmichael, they arrested Carmichael because of this lack of permit. And Stokely Carmichael expresses his fed upness with going to jail. He's tired. He's been arrested, right? In struggle, right? Sacrificing, in struggle, marching. He said, I'm tired of going to jail. So when he's released that June evening in 1966, he went to the rally at the new campsite. And there he told people he would not go back to jail. He said, I'm not going back to jail anymore. And after priming by Willie Ricks, whose name often gets missing from the record, who's now Mukasa Dada, he called for black power at the rally. The rally at which Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, who also gets left out of the record, who you heard me mention before as executive director, and James Foreman, among many others, attended. So now let me rewind just 2 years, because this is the familiar story. Black power, 1966, Greenwood.
Now, I have a few minutes, only 5, so if you'll allow me, maybe I can say a number of things that needs to be said in this country. That needs to be said in this country. And that's what I want to talk about. Now, I want to talk to black people across this country. I want to talk to black people across this country. There are 4 things we have to do. Number 1, we have to stop being ashamed of being black. We've got to stop being ashamed of being black. Number 2, we have to move into a position where we can define terms for what we want them to be, not what racist white society wants it to be. We have to move to define. We have to move to a position where we can feel strength and unity amongst each other from Watts to Harlem, where we won't ever be afraid. And the last thing we have to do is to build a power base so strong in this country that will bring them to their knees every time they mess with us. A black mercenary is a man who can get killed on a foreign land and come home and can't get a decent burial in his hometown. We are mercenaries.
4 things he's talked about. Race and black pride. Move to define selves and agenda. Unity from Watts to Harlem. And build a power base. So these 2 events happened, 66, 64. It wasn't just 1966. We at least know a couple years before that this was part of a conversation in the language in which we're used to hearing it only in 66. And in a language and in an explanation that says it is this kind of discussion that actually begins to undermine the beloved community when it's happening really at the same time by the same people who are both involved in civil rights at the same time that they're talking about power and fighting the hierarchy of white supremacy, right? Complicates things just a little bit. So these 2 events happen. So we have the video 66, and we have this lesser-known video where we see the germination and expression of such ideas earlier to prove it. But even then, we still don't capture or convey fully the multifaceted story and multiple actors beyond a mid-1960s male-driven paradigm. Okay? So an even broader framing is important and critical, a broader framing that repositions this 1966 moment as a critical turning point, but for sure really doesn't expand enough for us to understand and situate this moment within a more robust, panoramic, chronological, genealogical, ancestral, and geopolitical framework, a framework that actually helps us move out from this moment of 1966 as when it burst on the scene to really understanding this moment as the proliferation of black power politics, rethinking black power and black politics, the proliferation of black power and politics situated in a longer genealogical ancestral frame where there are roots, R-O-O-T-S, and roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, and expressions across time as early as, for my project, the early 20th century. Okay? Exposing the roots and the expressions of black power, small b and small p, and the emergence of black power, capital B and capital P, and the expansive era of black power politics. Echo, 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 black power politics. So, 3 snapshots. I'm going to give you roots, R-O-O-T-S. I'm going to give you roots, R-O-U-T-E-S. And I'm going to give you an example of expression. And then we're going to close with why this still matters. Does that sound good? Y'all still with me? Okay. So we're going to start with Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells, early to mid-1900s. Let me read you an excerpt from Concrete Demands to get us started on that. 1917, East St. Louis. Black people clamored at the murderous outrage in the almost 141-year-old republic. Just days before Independence Day in 1917, one of the most violent racial conflagrations of the 20th century exploded in East St. Louis, Illinois, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, Missouri. A growing black migrant population in the urban South and the North and the attendant contest for jobs increasingly spurred white worker resentment. So during World War I, labor strife had resulted in white workers striking in cities and what employers hiring black strikebreakers, and white employers hiring black strikebreakers. In East St. Louis, white workers believed that the city, quote, must remain a white man's town, end quote. 1917. The specter of black competition and expressions of black autonomy alongside black people's increase in numbers upset the white order of things. On July 1, armed white joyriders decided to travel through black neighborhoods and fire on black homes. Returning gunfire, black residents apparently killed 2 white police officers. The next day, the melee amped up. White people shot, assaulted, and killed black men, women, and children. They attacked black businesses and torched black homes in Black Valley. We see the genealogy and the progenitors that are connected to the streams of what will become, or what are the small b, the small p, becomes the big P, the big B, and the big P, right? The big B and the big P. That's like a tongue twister thing going on there, right? So we see that happening. What's the disruption? The disruption is this is happening in 1917. It very well could have been happening in the moment when a James Meredith got shot with buckshot from the side of a road that continued and called for the continuation of a Meredith March in 1966 that created the moment of Greenwood, right? Seeds in the germination in 1917 helps us to really understand the roots, R-O-O-T-S, of what is happening in American society around race and around questions of democracy, where we believe to actually be a democracy. The disruption is also that beginning with a woman disrupts the male paradigmatic narrative, right? That woman being Ida B. Wells, for me, is key because she's a black radical, a black feminist, even though that might be a little anachronistic in terms of the early 1900s. A proto-feminist maybe. A speaker of truth to white power as well as the black elite is, after all, she who is actually speaking truth to power when it comes to lynching of black people. A believer in self-defense who says maybe if everybody had a Winchester rifle, when people came for them, they would be so afraid because they'd be afraid they'd get taken with the folks they were coming after. A believer in black leadership, right? And so these experiences and these people together really provide us with some roots and genealogy, representing different progenitors, representing different crucibles, different streams, different parlances, different overlapping, often parallel again, and competing strategies and approaches to achieve black empowerment, but also plant and germinate. Echo, 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 echo. You will hear me say words over and phrases over and over again so they can sink in a little bit because it's a lot of information coming at you, Okay? A lot of information coming out. Sometimes I gotta keep it straight up here. Right? But also plant and germinate the seeds of anti-racist, anti-white supremacist liberation struggles under the broad umbrella of what we know to be Black power politics. So the other disruption is the narratives of singular political expressions of Black power is complicated by these various understandings of who is contributing to what will become the roots of Black power politics. Roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, mid-1950s to early 1960s. As World War II ended, the Cold War heated up, and quests for racial justice in the United States multiplied. And Negro Power, using that language, made their print debuts. One as the title of a travelogue in 1954, and then in the 1957 Ebony article. The latter, that is, quote unquote, Negro Power, in a memoir in 1958. So this phrase, Black Power, the rallying cry of Black Power in 1966, actually manifested in that phrase much earlier on. Okay? So where I took you from 1917, we're talking about the streams and the progenitors and the crucibles and the ideologies and the philosophies and the strategies and the tactics and the complications around race and gender and class and all of those things that will become a part of Black power politics. What I'm talking about now is the actual phrase, the actual word, the actual manifestation of it in the ways in which Black people are actually activating and talking about relationship to the state using that language in 1955, 57, and 58. Okay? These phrases actually attracted public attention and news coverage. However, at the time, neither became rallying cries nor provoked a groundswell of Black activism like they did in 1966. For sure, the reality of Black subjugation spurred outrage as well as activism in the United States. But unlike in the mid-1960s, when the word Black and Black power evoked a bevy of frenzied responses during the 1950s, the word red and all it implied held sway. The word red and all it implied held sway. What do I mean by that? Anybody know what I mean by that? Huh? Can you say it loud? Say it loud and proud. No, say it loud. Communism. Right? The word red held sway. The fear of red and the perceived and real sympathies, with communism in the Soviet Union initiated scares. You can still say that word today and people go, oh. I mean, think about it. This is the moment to help you unpack that. Because it's become so naturalized and so neutral and just so knee-jerk, we don't even know why sometimes people get upset about it. And we don't even know why sometimes the complication of that term in relationship to actually challenging colonialism and imperialism. Whether we agree with it or not is not the point. The point is to understand why it has held sway in that way. Even today, the fear of reds and the perceived and real sympathies with communism in the Soviet Union incited scares and U.S. state-based nationalistic anxieties that produced political campaigns to upend, contain, and manage protests at home and abroad. Even so, the 1950s marked a noteworthy coming out moment for Black power and Negro power, quote unquote, Negro power, especially when red, quote unquote, red met Black. Okay? So in this volatile decade, a dozen years before the phrase Black power gained popular cachet as a freedom movement slogan, the native son of Mississippi and Chicago-based author Andrew Richard Wright published Black Power. Just calling out Andrew. The book shared a Black self-determination story. It was not, however, one native to the United States. Instead, it detailed the saga of the anti-colonial struggle unfolding in the British-controlled Gold Coast colony. Wright recognized that in Africa, as in the United States, black people suffered white supremacist rule. And just an ocean away, they were imitating or initiating a battle for national sovereignty. And soon, the Gold Coast colony would become, anybody know what it would become? Ghana. Soon the Gold Coast colony would become independent Ghana. And in winning liberation, a potent symbol of black power, black political power throughout the diaspora, including in the United States. So to be clear, Black Power was not a book, because that's the title of the book, Black Power. It was not a book that embraced Africa as a U.S. black homeland, as had Garvey, who projected Liberia as a black Zionist dream. That's not what Wright is necessarily writing about. In some cases, Wright even critiques indigenous culture and African leaders. So it's complicated. All that to say is complicated. Not a one-off, totally match, kind of moment. Nevertheless, Black Power as a book provides a discrete moment for grappling with the political conditions that inspired the search for state power and its relationship to broader critiques of U.S. democracy, in Western society. So while many black activists domestically and internationally discuss black nationalism and struggle mightily against racism, Wright's book stands out as one of the earliest public deployments of quote-unquote black power as a political phrase. Paul Robeson, When Black Meets Red, later wrote about quote-unquote Negro power and discussed quote-unquote black power in a 1957 interview in Ebony and in his 1958 memoir, Here I Stand. A travel log documenting Wright's journey to the Gold Coast colony in the summer of 1953, Black Power also captures black leaders' concrete demands for black political power and economic control of the country's natural resources and wealth as remedies for challenging indigenous peoples' oppressive social conditions. So Wright concluded Black Power this way. He says, have no illusions. Have no illusions. He warned Nkrumah, have no illusions. Have no illusions regarding Western attitudes. Westerners, high and low, feel that their codes, ideals, and conceptions of humanity do not apply to black men. Have no illusions. He further advised Nkrumah to beware of foreign money. 1953, 54. Beware of foreign money. Beware of advice, foreign advice. Beware of foreign ideologies. He said, quote, you have escaped from one slavery. You have escaped from one slavery. Be chary of other slaveries. No matter in what guise they present themselves, whether as glittering ideas, promises of security, or rich mortgages upon your future. And Wright continued, there will be no way to avoid a degree of suffering, of trial, of tribulation. Suffering comes to all people. But you have within you your power, the means to make the suffering of your people meaningful, to redeem whatever stresses and strains may come. None but the Africans can perform this for Africa. Anybody hear echo? Anybody hear echo? Anybody hear echo? What's the echo? What's the echo? Africa for Africans. Who said Africa for Africans? Garvey. Roots, O-O-T-S. Roots, R-O-U-T-E-S. International global travel. Ghana connected to U.S. empire, colonialism, Cold War, politics. Echoes of Garvey's Africa for the African slogan resound here. Wright, however, did not include transplanted black people in the diaspora as the appropriate wielders of power in Africa. He meant indigenous, even if Western educated black African leaders. In fact, except for in the occasional reflection on commentary, American quote-unquote Negroes and U.S. racial politics remain peripheral in Wright's intellectual framing and analysis of Black Power, the book Black Power. By the mid-1950s and into the 1960s, Nkrumah and independent Ghana became an inspiration. Even though he wasn't talking about U.S. Black Power politics. Became an inspiration for those fighting racial oppression and white subjugation. Ghana also emerged as a symbol and a place worthy of visiting, and a literal home for numerous black militant progenitors and advocates of black power in the United States. This included W.E.B. Du Bois, Shirley Graham Du Bois, Vicki Garvin, who this is the only time you're going to hear her name in this talk, who's a black radical labor activist, Julian Mayfield, ditto, black journalist and compatriot of Robert F. Williams. Remember Robert F. Williams from Lone, North Carolina, who believed in black self-defense, so they actually took away his position, who actually inspired Don and Max Freeman, who started the Revolutionary Action Movement, who actually met Malcolm X at the 1963 Detroit Grassroots Conference, right? Roots and Roots. Became a home for Maya Angelou for a short period of time. She's passed on. And Malcolm X. The same year the Gold Coast colony became the sovereign state of Ghana, Paul Robeson did an interview. Black Meets Red. Paul Robeson did an interview with black journalist Carl T. Rowan for Ebony magazine. And Robeson remained internationally attuned. They took his passport, but he remained internationally attuned, and they didn't want him going overseas and talking about the United States and critiquing the United States for its racial and economic politics and subjugation of peoples. He remained hopeful and inspired by Ghanaian as well as the prospects of Jamaican independence. And in the interview, Robeson shared, 1950s, Robeson shared his desire, quote, to just sit for a few days and observe this black power, end quote. Robeson's admiration of black power received attention in the press. And Ebony publicized it by running a subscription and announcing the publication of Rowan's article. And, quote, has Paul Robeson betrayed the Negro? End quote. September 1957 ad query, quote, what happened to Paul Robeson? The Emperor Jones with the big bass baritone voice that boomed out from the concert halls of the world. How did he become the isolated figure that he is today? Why is he shunned by Negroes and whites alike? What is his doctrine of black power that he thinks holds the key to the freedom of American Negroes? And then the ad encourages newspaper readers to take a look at the, quote, sensational first-person story, end quote, in the October 1957 issue of Ebony. And Robeson did give his views, positioning himself on the side of the black workers, not the black bourgeoisie. Robeson proclaimed the potential of the power of Bandung and power of black people. He argued that black people's unified voice, unity, Stokely, unity, self-determination, the power of people's unified voice could count towards challenging Southern racists and white supremacy. And he said, Paul Robeson, black people, quote, don't have to go begging to these people. He asserted. For him, the, quote, Negro masses held the key. 1950s. Organized, they represented, quote unquote, black power. And then the article ended with an arguably Christian vision of racial political upheaval. Rowan wrote this. He said, Robeson is convinced he will have the last laugh even on those Negroes who betrayed him. For he is sure that the day will come when American Negroes will find that, quote unquote, black power holds the key to their freedom. 1963, jump. Familiar narrative, March on Washington. Somebody tell me what happened to the March on Washington. Have a dream. We often forget jobs and freedom. That's because that's the way the history is told to us. But we do mark that moment as a civil rights moment. An alternate framing, an alternate and parallel framing, in anticipation of the centennial of the Emancipation Proclamation, which is also the March on Washington, right? 1853, 1963. Oddly, Queen Mother Moore. Who's oddly Queen Mother Moore? Did y'all hear tonight? Oddly Queen Mother. Who's oddly Queen Mother Moore? Where's the echo from? Huh? She was a Garveyite. Marcus Garvey, UNIA. Mentor to Malcolm X. Right? Oddly Queen Mother Moore, who co-founded the Reparations Committee, based in Los Angeles, had filed a claim with the U.S. government for reparations on December 20th, 1962. And she and fellow activists had gathered 1 million signatures on a petition. She said, I begged gas from station to station, and I begged from farm to farm. And once I was shot by the Klan, 3 shots. And they went on thinking they had killed me after my car went into the ditch. You need assistance to do the work, social justice work. You need assistance to do the work for black people. And then Moore presented the petition to President John F. Kennedy. And he did not respond. And in 1963, she published the pamphlet, Why Reparations? Money for Negroes, quote unquote. And the opening paragraph read like this. It said, quote, after 244 years of free slave labor and the most inhumane, daily indignities, the most inhumane, sinister, and barbaric atrocity in St. Louis, Echo, which passed in magnitude any savagery perpetuated against human beings in the history of the planet Earth, and an additional 100 years of so-called freedom from 1863 to 1963. An additional 100 years of so-called freedom accompanied by terror, the Klan, lynching, everyday, daily indignities and battles against economic and racial injustice. That's my word, not hers. Accompanied by terror, the committee seeking reparations for the descendants of America's slaves concludes that the payment of reparations is an absolute necessity if the government of the United States is ever to wipe the slate clean, redeem herself, and pay for the damages she has inflicted upon more than 25 million American citizens. 1963, alternate and parallel story around black empowerment and the rise and the seeding of black power in the midst of and relationship to civil rights and the search for jobs and freedom. James Baldwin, who I started with, held a similarly critical view of and in the centennial year as Queen Mother Moore. Right? We know 63 for the March on Washington. We don't know 63 for this. In his article, Not 100 Years of Freedom, published in January 1963, in the Liberator magazine, which is an echo of William Lloyd Garrison's Liberator in the abolitionist period of 1830s. Founded by black radical internationalists, Baldwin blatantly asserted that the nation, in commemorating the Emancipation Proclamation, really had little to be celebrating. Instead, he wrote, the centennial, quote, harshly illuminates our failure to either end the Civil War or to recognize the Negroes as human beings. End quote. And then calling attention to Cold War rhetoric, black meets red, that stealthily undermine black liberation struggles by labeling activists communists. Baldwin, however, boldly contended this. He said, quote, "Our dangers do not exist mainly in the area of the Cold War. It is the irresolution with which we confront the political and social and moral chaos of this country which is dangerous." And the slow implementation of Brown versus Board of Education verdict, disappointment with both political parties, continuation of housing discrimination despite President Kennedy's promise to end it with the stroke of a pen, unfair lending practices by banks echo like now. I guess it's not an echo, unless I'm echoing back from now to then. Unfair lending practices by banks and anti-black union and employer policies helped explain why, even according to Dr. King, why 1963 became the year of the quote-unquote Negro Revolt. Ongoing gradualism and recalcitrance increasingly provoked criticism of equality and justice denied and contributed to the milieu that would hasten the big P. I keep saying the big P, the big B, the big B, the big P, Black Power, the big B, the big P, Black Power era. So as the centennial year unfolded, more vigorous calls for the establishment of black conduits of political power shared the public stage. Okay? Shared the public stage with interracial rights campaigns. And these newly strident voices question a freedom orthodoxy that put faith in moral suasion and a federal government that moves slowly, very slowly, to dismantle racial and economic inequalities when it even did so at all. Women of Color, a collective of poor black women in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Fast forward. We did 66 earlier, so 66 is what I'm talking around because I'm trying to, decentralize that narrative in a way that doesn't lose it because it's critical, but decentralize it. Now we're expressions. We have roots, R-O-O-T-S. We have roots, R-O-U-T-E-S. Now we're expressions of black power. So consistent with a radical organizing tradition among women of color, a collective of poor black women, because poor black women often get lost. Poor black women often get lost. So I'm going to just keep saying poor black women. A collective of poor black women in Mount Vernon and New Rochelle, New York, joined with black socialist feminists, Patricia Murphy Robinson, to pen a letter to a North Vietnamese sister from an Afro-American woman. And Robinson, who had helped to initiate Black Women Enraged in the aftermath of Malcolm X's assassination, he was a friend of hers, eventually left that organization claiming that some of its members prioritized their relationship with black male nationalists and possessed middle-class myopia with regard to poor black women, and children. A mother of 3 children, Robinson earnestly embraced self-determination. And she credited growing up in a patriarchal and black-oriented family with pushing her to recognize her, quote, real class and caste position. And Robinson wrote, quote, "I am positive that there are many women like me, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Chinese, etc., revolutionary out of experience and inner need." As part of her political journey, Robinson read Fanon, Frantz Fanon, and The Crusader, and traveled to Cuba, and kept abreast of the goings-on with Ethel Johnson, who was a mentor to Max Stanford, who put Max Stanford in touch with Queen Mother Moore, Philadelphia. Ethel Johnson, who knew Robert F. Williams.
And the women whom Robinson met lived the reality of urban inequality. Primarily domestic workers and welfare recipients, they were forced to eke out a means of survival in often cramped and squalid residences. They were also mothers who grew tired of the local schools, complaining about their children. echoed. Miseducating them, echoed. Their concerns echoed. That's actually it. Their concerns echoed decades of critiques by other rights and Black power activists, among them Julius Hobson in D.C., who was co-founder of the short-lived Organization for Black Power, and Mae Mallory in Harlem, who organized in Monroe with Robert F. Williams and the Black Panther Party members in Harlem and Oakland, the latter of which was the iconic Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, founded by Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, and mothers who actually started parents' councils to push for school reform. They were, in a very real sense, obsessed with education, not as a tool to achieve middle-class respectability, but as a means of empowerment. And fed up, some of them decided to start a small, quote-unquote, freedom school, right in their kitchens, where everybody had already gathered anyhow. And they fought miseducation, but fighting miseducation did not start in them with children. Adults were miseducated as well. All of us were miseducated. All of us. Adults were miseducated as well. That's a noun on it. All of adults were miseducated as well, and their voices muted and too often ignored. So among the several things they did as a collective was actually develop the Poor Black Women Study papers and write letters of protest. And one of them was a letter to a North Vietnamese sister. And in this letter, they talked about and gave the history and addressed the kind of post-Reconstruction era, described the KKK, and talked about frightened fascists in white hoods. They talked about, explained that Black people had to burn land, they did not have the power to own it. They talked about critique back to Africa movement on Darby. Okay, so disruption, right? Influence with disruption in terms of how people are assessing Marcus Garvey, just like Hubert Harrison did, right? And integration strategies as the purview of bourgeois Black people. And they touted Du Bois and Robeson, even though they were middle class Black radicals, but they analyzed the system of the enemy. Unfortunately, they said neither man had the resources or followers to unite with poor Blacks. But like Nkrumah, they saw the opportunities socialism could afford their people. Another stream, another expression under Black power. Black capitalism and Black socialism both existed under the Big Ten of Black power. Black women, poor people, challenge Black elites who were trying to gain Black political power under the Big Ten of Black power. Right? Black women challenged Black men for their sexism under the tent of Black power. They talked about being in the belly of the monster counter-revolutionary oppressor, talking about the United States and democracy. They call this Black power. Shit. In their quest to understand poor people's conditions and seek liberation, the damned question what they call this stuff, Black power shit, the race, class, and gender politics. The authors of the damned, many of them who were also writing under the revolt of poor Black women, and many of them who were part of the Mount Vernon New Rochelle group who organized with and worked with Pat Murphy Robinson, actually critiques the class politics, the specter of Black elites gaining a sense of power and replicating, heaven forbid, replicating the power dynamics that existed in the community with whites already. They said, today we can look forward to Black capitalism and not look forward to it anything like look forward to it, but as a critique. Today we can look forward to Black capitalists doing the same thing, trying to use us as wage slaves. So on this score, they critique Black power as Black capitalism, which gained cachet while failing to remedy widespread unemployment for the Black masses or dismantle class hierarchy in the Black community. Roots, R-O-O-T-S, roots, R-O-U-T-E-S, and expressions. Now, the real home stretch. Why is this relevant today? Why is it relevant today? Priority. Priorities? Priorities? So black women and men have sought to empower black communities and become self-determined black people. And they put not just their feet to the pavement, but also their backs and their backsides on the sidewalks, on the roads, on the dirt mounds, on the farms, and prison cells, and school and government property. And literally, most of the others, those who do not theorize or lecture or write or march or lie down or strike or leaflet or holler or organize or control or enter politics or critique economic injustice and state power or set up alternative institutions in an attempt to contest white power were witness bearers to the concrete demands that motivated searches for power. And whether these non-participants were aware or uninformed, or whether they were moved or turned a blind eye, however, the signs of poverty and privilege punctuated all pieces of living before, during, and today. Way after, way after, way after, the seeding, the coming of age, the proliferation, and the demise of the era of black power politics. So the part of a broader black freedom struggle and organizing traditions, the multiple streams of black power and its many progenitors, believers, fellow travelers, and critics compel important dialogue, if nothing else. If you walk out of here with nothing else, all confused, trying to figure out who connected to who, done what, in what year, what or OU, or what was the expressions, or who was the poor black women in revolt talking about the black power shit and the damned, and how they collected the king, and what was the alternative parallel universe of Queen Mother Moore and the record. No matter if you got all that straight or not, right? It will compel some dialogue. So black power as history is complicated. Rethinking black power as history is complicated. Rethinking black power and the utility of black power and why it's relevant today is to think about black politics. And what does that mean in terms of how we engage and think about a transformative potential? So the spirited criticisms of romantic unity, critiques within black power, prove this by birthing new conversations, by talking about gender, by talking about heterosexism, by talking about economic inequality, right? Within black power, let alone between black people and white people, but between African Americans and other ethnic groups, right? Prove this by birthing new conversations and organizations and understandings of how power works and struggles that help expose the complexity of inequality. And together these criticisms presage the struggles ahead, which is the moment we're in. And in their most radical formulations, such as triple oppression and secondary marginalization and intersectional analyses and global dialogues, generating visions of collective freedom not yet achieved. So it seems then that the need for struggles to achieve empowerment for black people beyond the individual worthy black middle class, and even beyond a recuperated dependency on white goodwill, remains ever necessary. And it requires discussion of class and gender politics, systemic inequality, and liberation for poor people. DOJ civil rights investigation into the Ferguson criminal justice system found that authorities have routinely violated the rights of black citizens and have used tickets to generate revenue for the city. When did this report happen? Huh? A few days ago. This report was issued a few days ago. The Justice Department also disclosed several emails sent by current Ferguson officials over the past several years that revealed racial bias. One email depicted President Barack Obama as a chimpanzee. Another email described a man who wanted to get welfare for his dogs because they were mixed in color, unemployed, lazy, can't speak English, and have no friggin' clue who their daddies are. This is Michael Brown territory, eh? A third email included a photo depicting bare-chested dancing women with the caption, Michelle Obama's high school reunion. while another email included jokes about Muslims. Requires discussions of class and gender politics and systemic inequality and liberation for poor people. So before I die, I would like to see unity and order. I want to live. I want to be loved. I want peace on earth. James Baldwin wrote in No Name in the Street in 1972, quote, "Only poets, since they must excavate and recreate history, have ever learned anything from it." So as the accounts of struggles in my book and this talk hopefully make clear, much history remains to be excavated and understood, and we must strive to become Baldwin's poets, and I say, creators of social justice.